So, Mike, I wanted to introduce Chris Williams to you. He is my CRM guy, for lack of a better word. So I give him a ton of referrals for all the CEOs who are, struggling around sales and marketing. And what I thought would be a good idea to bring him on to discuss it, because that seems to be the number one issue across Vistage. So, and frankly, 10 years ago, no one gave a rat's ass about your sales and marketing. So I think it speaks to what we were talking about in the previous podcast, Mike. Like, this next generation's overparented, so almost no one of our generation, including private equity, is comfortable or secure with the next generation. So what they need is they want to be convinced that the sales and marketing, the revenue stream is going to continue without the current the current owner, and that's a big stumbling block. The biggest of which is sales and marketing. Now, if I had my druthers, I wouldn't call it sales and marketing. I'd call it sales or marketing. And it kind of helps do the diagnosis on the company about which is at fault, and then where should they steer into. Having said that, sometimes what it requires is taking time to build a budget to actually afford to bring in outside counsel like Chris Williams and CRM Solutions. So I thought it'd be just kind of an interesting thing about some of the referrals that I've given you just recently. We could talk about them, Chris.
Sure.
Bring up some things so that the CEOs kind of understand how big an issue this really is. Just to put it in perspective, in my database, the sales and marketing is worth an average of $1.4 million increase in valuation just within 12 months, not including growth. I just looked at some numbers today with another consultant, and we're talking as much as $15 million more in revenue just in the next 3 years. So, Chris, why don't you tell us, like, what are you seeing these days? Because I'm thinking like a CRM audit might be a good place to start.
Sure. So it's interesting you speak about some of the referrals. Now, my sweet spot as far as my client profile that I go after or that is attracted to what I do are usually the businesses that are doing between $10 and $20 million and they want to grow a bit. And they got there because the owner, they're dynamic people who go out and generate sales by their own just willpower and their work ethic and all that. And what they do, they everything comes natural from that aspect of it because they're working so hard at it. And then they start saying, okay, I want to take a step back. And I want to bring somebody in who's going to help me increase those and let me take a step back and start working. What's that phrase? Working on my business instead of in my business, because they've been working in their business for so long. And they start hiring people and right away running into a problem like, why I'm not getting the result? They're not getting the results that I got. And the reason is that they're just different people. They'd be running their own businesses if they were the same people.
It's like the star athlete syndrome.
Yeah, exactly right. Wait, you and I were talking about that the other day. Exactly.
Yeah, I remember there was one guy on the Giants that attempted to try to be a special teams coach, and he failed miserably despite being a great special teams player for the Giants.
Sure.
So I'm sure you can relate to that with the Dolphins, right?
No, I can relate to that on the basketball end with Pat Riley, by the way, because Pat Riley is one of the greatest NBA coaches ever. Also coached the Knicks, famous faxed you all the middle finger when he left the Knicks and came to the Heat.
I have a basketball signed by him right over there.
Was a marginal basketball player as a professional. But one point I want to make, and this isn't necessarily sales and marketing, but or sales or marketing. Communications is kind of up that alley in the sense that many CEOs don't feel the need to have a professional communicator or communications team in-house. They kind of outsource it and put a press release on the wire whenever they have something important to share. So I feel like oftentimes folks that do what I do, we're not brought in until there's already a crisis and they're asking us to help. Maybe in your line of work, it's more of, we're bringing you in because, man, we need to increase our sales or we need to do better marketing and maybe you can help us, but it may have been a year too late that they should have started this earlier before the competition caught up to them.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. When you say a crisis, a lot of times it is a crisis because they've gone through the expense of hiring and firing people, burning lists, and turning around like, why aren't I not getting the results? And there's many reasons for it. And number one to me is that, and like what I used to say to people, I still do too, is from a CRM perspective, it's a tool. And years ago, when I first started in this business, I was just installing this tool for everybody and putting it up, and everybody would start working on this tool. But it's never about the tool. You need the tool, but if you don't know how to use it properly, if you don't, and this goes to what Mark was just saying before, you don't have a plan, an audit, are we measuring the correct things? Are we capturing the data and then looking at it, that it's looking at to where our goals want to be in 5 years? And are we able to make corrections and continue to do the things that are working, stop doing things that aren't working? And all of that comes down to these data points that they need to have in place before they can start building an expensive.
So basically what you're saying is you can grow a company between your sweet spot is $10 and $20 million, but you're growing it based on where the data that you have is going to lead you to create a plan that's realistic, it's actionable, and that could lead you from that 20 million, let's say on the high end, $20 million annual revenue to $30 to $40 million. In other words, you're identifying data that maybe they're not even conscious of in order to create that roadmap.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that people, a lot of times too, you'll hear people say, well, I want to increase sales 20%. Like, well, where'd you get that number from?
Yeah.
And how are you going to get there? Okay, so let's agree to that number. Now how are we going to get to 20% increase in sales? They're like, well, we're going to just sell more. I'm like, well, that worked for you because you didn't plan on getting to 10 or $15 million. You just sold the crap out of what you were doing, developed a bunch of relationships, and you got there. And you're like, wow, this is awesome. And now you want to get to the next level, but now you need to have some measurements to know how to get there.
Yeah. There's even a thing about, like, just recently, a company contacted me out of Canada, and they were looking to foster relationships for construction companies in the United States, and they asked me if I could help. So I called Chris, because I don't even, like, my CRM, I don't even know the credentials about how to get into it or whatever. So I just said to him, I said, which is, I would imagine most CEOs are exactly like that, right?
Sure.
So I called Chris, I sent him the email. Without even calling me back, he just sent me a list of 300 construction companies saying, but he said, like, in this kind of I told you so kind of way, see, this is the reason why we need all that kind of data. And I was like, all right, well, there you got some evidence from your side of the argument. So
Yeah.
it's I see it as valuable. What I see though is I think it starts with the CRM audit, because what I'm gonna do is argue the M&A side. So I was at a recent conference in Baltimore, and 3 guys got up, and these were all private equity guys, former private equity guys, and currently dealing with M&A or what have you. And every single one of them walked us through meticulously how important the CRM really is. So for those people who don't know what it means, it's a client retention and management software like Zoho or HubSpot or
Salesforce is the big one in the room.
Yeah, Salesforce is the gorilla in the room, right? So, but what happens though is, I think the key is the Salesforce actually utilizing it as best they possibly can? And then what's it like when you try to get them to do it, Chris?
Yeah. So, well, there's always the pushback. Well, my sales guys aren't going to do this. Yeah, that's one of them. Or it just takes too much time. And I'm always like, who owns the data then? If it's too much for the sales guys to put the data in, who owns it?
Yeah, they own it.
Right. Because, if it's going in when a sale is complete, when they want to get their commission on it, there's a whole bunch of work that's been done up to that point. And there's prospects out there, there's relationships that have been built, that the sales guy now has he may have it on Outlook and Excel and a bunch of disjointed programs that he owns then at that point. And at that, you're
it's a great point. Let me hammer that home, because I was just in Knoxville and Upland, California this week, just back to back. When I was in Knoxville, the person that runs the Vistage board turned to all the members and said, every one of you is held hostage by your star salesperson.
Yes.
That person is, and they're the ones who are most reluctant to do this type of thing because they know what's in the best interest of their customer. It's really like they're operating as an independent contractor and as an employee at the same time. So it's like they're held hostage. But then the rest of the sales force looks up to that person because they're the number one rep, and then they try to emulate them. So it creates a situation where they can't necessarily create initiatives and then get inertia. They're struggling to get traction, and every one of them kind of like they like roll their eyes, they look at their feet at the same time. It's how do they win over the other salespeople and then eventually get the star salespeople? That's what they were lamenting at that time. So we were going around the room about like what are some strategies to do that. I had a couple. So like, okay, so now they got the CRM. How do they know they're actually doing it right or not? That's the CRM audit. Then once they see the deficiencies, how do they start moving the needle in the right direction?
Yeah. So, one of the ways that I'll always talk to CEOs about this is that there's this dashboard that you get, this view into what your salespeople, your marketing people are doing. And it's this big brother looking in, seeing how things are going. But if you approach it that way, the salespeople are obviously going to push back. If you look at it from a different perspective, and to the salespeople, you just say, look, you have 2,000, I'm looking at your lead bucket, you have 2,000 leads. How are you spending your day? And they're like, oh, I do this and that and the other thing. And I said, well, what if we were to break these down into smaller buckets by whatever we want to, market segment, type of customer profile, and give you little views of what you need to be working on every day? Could you be more successful could you sell more? Could you make more money if you had a better view into what you're working on now, what you should be working on, what's been successful for you in the past? And most of the time it's yes. I could be more successful if that were the case. And so and that's not just a sales piece to the salespeople, that's the truth. Right? If I could, you were talking about the being held hostage by that salesperson that's going out and killing it. The problem is they've probably developed these relationships over years, and now they're sitting back and they're rolling the same thing over and over again, and there's no accountability to what they're building for the future. Are they still out prospecting? Are they still out building new markets, or what they're learning in their current markets? Or is that being brought back in so that the rest of the team can go out and market and sell and be better at what they do? I'll argue that they can, and that everybody would be better and make more money if they had more defined metrics and views into what they're working on.
Well, from my perspective, what I do is I come at it from a strategic perspective, recognizing, hey, it's been 15 years since the last recession in the United States. That's like living on the West Coast and you haven't had an earthquake in 25 years, or living on the East Coast like we do and you haven't had a hurricane in 25 years. It's time to buy the insurance. Right. So one of the dilemmas that I see in Vistage across the board, the number one thing I see they do wrong is they surrender strategy to the sales force. A massive bad move, because sales forces aren't strategic. It's almost the reason why they're really good at relationships. Kind of, they live in the here and now, and then the future happens to them. So my argument is we have to coach strategy into the sales force. And a perfect example of that is one of the biggest things to move the needle on the valuation of a company today is maintenance contracts. And when's the last time you walked into a company and saw two salespeople bragging about how many maintenance contracts they sold? I mean, I can count on one hand of the 20,000 CEOs that I've presented to that all of their revenue came by maintenance contracts. That means, so now you're sitting in due diligence, and frankly, due diligence is code for I'm not going to pay you what I promised you. It's how do I get you to sign a legal document, let me look up your skirt and see what's wrong with the company. First thing we're looking for is the revenue stream going to continue without you? Maintenance contracts do that. So, but yet salespeople aren't actually selling them because they're not being incentivized to sell them, and it's not the sexy sale. So what I've been recommending to the CEOs recently is to say, how do you tie back? How can you tie back the overall compensation for the sales force so that they're encouraged to sell maintenance contracts? You get what I'm saying, Chris?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I've talked to people now a lot of times about the you need to have a dynamic compensation, and it's based on commissions. It's based on and it's not just a flat commission. There might be some staired commissions on that. But you talk about maintenance contracts. Are they being incentivized? Is it worth my time to go out and sell those maintenance contracts? The other thing I'll add in there as far as that concerns, I like to add in an activity bonus for salespeople.
What does that mean?
So we measure people with the lagging indicators. How much did you sell? And a lot of times there's if I look, especially new people, there's a cycle that goes through. And it may take me a couple of months to get up to speed, and then it takes me a couple of months to make that first sale. And the leading indicators are, what am I doing with those market qualified leads that I get? Am I following up with them? How many phone calls have I made? How many emails have I sent out? What kind of relationships have I developed? Have I gone through and are we ranking? Have I made calls into each company, but have I also made strategic calls that I'm looking for the titles that I need to? And all of that, all of those activities, however you want to measure them, are the leading indicators. And if I can give any salesperson, it's a number. It's always like nothing's changed around it being a numbers game. And if you're doing the work, if you're doing the outreach, if you're doing the prospecting, you're going to be successful. So a lot of times when I say an activity bonus, it's taking a percentage of their salary, sometimes and backing it out and saying, okay, I'm going to give you this in an activity bonus that we're going to agree to. You and I are going to sit down and agree to, these are the activities, the minimum activities for you to be successful. By all means, go in and exceed on those. But if we can go these, and then we have two things. We have a measurement, a metric that I can look at, and you can look at. We also have something that we can sit down on a monthly or a quarterly basis and review. Did you do these? Which one of these all led to a success? Which ones didn't? Which ones do you need to get better at? Which ones do you need coaching at? Which ones do we need to stop doing? But it's all about, when you talk about maintenance contracts, it just made me think that all of those things have to be, we can't just say you're getting 20% commission on your sales. We have to look at it dynamically on what we're selling and where we're commissioning these people or compensating them across the board.
What's interesting is, and lobbying is something that I've done off and on. I'm not lobbying right now, I'm more in the communication space, but even though lobbyists wouldn't need necessarily a CRM, the companies they deal with have CRMs, because it depends on what part of the country you're operating from. But like, for example, I live in Broward County. I'm not sure what the structure is here, but in Miami-Dade County, they used to have what was called success fees. So if you were a lobbyist that walked a company, usually an infrastructure company or somebody that provides services, because most governments don't provide the service, they don't provide custodial service, or they don't build all the buildings. They outsource it and they monitor the construction and the service that you provide. If you would guide a company through a procurement process and you were successful, you won the contract after you went before the committee, made your presentations, you were ranked higher, and then you were due a success fee. Again, they're not legal anymore in Miami-Dade County, but other parts of the country may still have them. And that's thrown into a CRM. And then when you get to be very large companies, you have lobbyists all over the United States, and you have to keep track of, well, based on our prior agreement, you were using the example, Chris, of you and I have an agreement on 20% of sales or whatever it may be, let's say. But for lobbyists, it was usually 2 to 3% of gross, and it could be on a monthly basis. So lobbyists used to love those because they're not doing anything, and it's just every month for the life of that contract. Usually about 3 to 5 years is kind of the sweet spot. Sometimes you can go up to 10 years on a 5-year renewal. But it's residual, right? Until the contract would come to an end. So they're more of it's input into somebody's CRM so that the lobbyists are rewarded. Or sometimes it's just business development experts. I use lobbyists because I've worked with them, and they're the ones that usher the process through a government. But they're also just folks that develop business, I guess, in companies that sell equipment or whatever else. My brother could probably be great for this conversation, Mark. So that
I'm having a conversation with your brother these days, so it's on hold.
there you go. I mean,
And actually, it's a great example because he when we talk about the audit. So what I did do for them was do the CRM audit, and they the two of them, from your brother's perspective, were like they're just in a market where there a lot of businesses coming at them. And if they want to look, and I think that they're both looking at it this way, it's like, well, okay, well, hold on, we're getting all of this data in, and right now it's coming in and everything's working well, but how are we going to capture this data? How are we going to organize it so that as we grow and as there's more people here and as there's more subcontractors and different contacts that we come in, how are we going to manage that? And let's and they're forward thinking about it because they're like, there's we don't have all that yet, but as that grows out, let's start building that.
Yeah, because he's in a kind of those are like the I don't want to call them unicorns, but for lack of a better description, unicorns, the parts of the business that maybe are untapped. That's not necessarily my business, but those types of operations where they see the growth coming and it's coming at them so quickly, so they start early, which is very smart. Some others, they come in a year too late.
Yeah, that's a startup category. Like there's a person we're going to have on the presentation on the podcast a little later on. His name is David Richards, and what he's been doing is he creates like a fractional board of directors. So this is a very, very sophisticated consultant. Has done hundreds of turnarounds, run publicly traded companies. What he's doing is he's bringing in the sophistication of publicly traded companies into a private company, which is the best of both worlds, because the bad side of a publicly traded company is that their strategy goes to 90 days as soon as they're publicly traded. It's 90 days, 90 days, 90 days, 90 days, right? So what that does, that's ultimately their Achilles heel. It's the reason why the majority of all publicly traded companies are frankly run like crap. So if you take their sophistication and you give it to a private company, you're talking about explosive growth. So what he just told me this morning when we were having a quick conversation about what he does prepping for the next podcast is the first and foremost thing is sales and marketing. The first thing they look at, he walks into the room, he goes, okay, show me your sales process. And if they're going humana, he said, you're trading for 3 times EBITDA, 3 times. So let's say, because what I was saying was when I was just in Knoxville, they argued the companies that were in there were all in the same industry, very unusual Vistage Group. So what they was saying, well, Mark, these companies only trade for 3 to 5 times EBITDA, so or net profitability. So what this guy was telling me, I told him that story, and he said, well, yeah, but which do you want? Do you want the 3 or do you want the 5? So if you want the 5, you got to make sure your CRM is perfect.
Yeah.
Like it has to be spot on that anyone else could take over if a salesperson died, if the CEO died, if something happened, some type of catastrophic thing, you have to own the data.
Right.
So, and that's the first rung in the ladder. But I think I've got a nagging suspicion, Chris, that's just the first.
Yeah.
Well, because there's a whole host of CEOs out there that didn't come to their position by way of being a great salesperson. They came by way of being a great ops person in another company, and then came there and they don't know anything about the sales, how to motivate the sales, how to rally them, how to get them to do stuff.
Yeah.
And they struggle with that.
And the accountability across the organization too. It's, if you have superstars that are you usually have, one superstar, you've got a bunch of B players and a couple of C players in there. And if we don't have the data and the accountability around that, things are just going to peter along there at a certain rate without you having definable measurements that you're going to be able to speak to and be able to correct to.
Yeah.
Around that accountability.
Well, when I was in California, that group, it's kind of interesting. This is one of the few things I've added to the scholarship around this. In the central states, 65% of my audiences want their company to pass on to the next generation. I think it speaks to the farming culture of the central states, right? On the coasts, not a single hand went up in the air in Upland, California, when I said, do you want this to pass on to the next generation? Because sometimes I got to bring that out as a kind of a gorilla in the room. So in that case, you got to pass due diligence in the first go, and somewhere between 60 and 70% of all companies out there will not pass due diligence on the first go.
Yeah.
And this is the very first thing they're looking for, the CRM and then the Salesforce.
Right.
Will the revenue stream continue without them?
Yeah.
So how can they be assured? And I think it all comes back to that people do not have faith in the next generation. So they're concerned about the leadership of the next generation because, frankly, they were overparented.
Yeah.
By the way, I did want to correct something at the beginning of this. Mark said something about generations and us. Mark is slightly older than me. I'm from the millennial generation. I just wanted to correct.
I don't know. I'd be proud of that, you.
Just wanted to correct that. I was born in 82.
Right. 82. My God, you're a kid. So I'm 1 year into. I'm actually the first year of Gen X.
Yeah.
So thank God I didn't fall in that baby boomer.
Exactly. We hate to be as bitter and resentful for all the generations around us, Chris.
I wanted to touch on that because, see, in South Florida, we're not. For example, New York, you have a well-established history of families that have passed on businesses, etc. South Florida, particularly Miami, is not that. One, because we're very transient. Two, the businesses that have been around a very long time are usually service industry, so restaurants, not hotels. I don't believe that's applicable, but restaurants, sugar. We have a major sugar industry out of Palm Beach County. And those are really it. You'd think maybe railroads, that because of the Flagler family, that's no longer the case. It's run by basically one company. But South Florida is a little different. We don't have that, we're not big on manufacturing yet. I hope we do diversify our economy. And in the central part of the state, they're starting to see the space industry come in because NASA's more of a regulator, launch off my platform in Cocoa Beach up there, Cape Canaveral. But the private space industry is really coming into the space coast of Florida. But we don't really have that. So I'm wondering, Chris, do you have a lot of, you don't have to reveal them obviously, but a lot of Florida-based customers? Or is it like I imagine that you're more spread out in other parts of the country?
Yeah, so spread. I would say, I mean, I'm spread out. But I do have some, I do have some players in Florida. A couple around insurance. I've got 2 around insurance. Somebody else who does truck leasing, big truck leasing, things like that. But
I think you really got your start with financial advisors, and they're all over. We're all over Florida.
Yeah,
but
we got a lot of those down here.
Oh,
I'm curious about from a cultural perspective. You being Cuban is because I have a ton of respect for immigrants, and when immigrants come here, they truly know how great this country is. What I don't know is, are they more likely to want their company to go to the next generation, or do they sell their companies? Do you have any insight into that?
This isn't even scripted, but I'm glad you brought it up, especially the fact that I'm of Cuban descent. You see, when you, especially that first wave that came, not around 59, Castro was too new, but 60, 61, then post Bay of Pigs, then LBJ Freedom Flights. The ones that built businesses, I would say the parents would be incredibly disappointed if their children did not take over their business. And we're not talking about major companies like, for example, Mostech, which is a major infrastructure provider and publicly traded. I'm referring to the nursery that your parents built up, or a restaurant, as I mentioned before. There's one particular family that I think of that they started a restaurant business that I think had 2 stores all the way up until the early 2000s. Their son came back. He was on a college scholarship playing baseball in Washington, comes back, takes over the business. They're at like 11 restaurants now. So they pass it on.
Yeah.
And yes, especially amongst Cubans in Miami, That's my experience, obviously. And there are Puerto Ricans, there are Venezuelans, Colombians all
Yeah,
over
for
the
sure.
place. But particularly in South Florida, the Cuban culture was very much, if I'm building my business, I want to bring this to you. I have friends in freight forwarding that are third generation,
Yep.
third,
All right, so
that run the
let me
same
jump
freight forwarding company.
let me jump in here for a second because this is relevant to the overall platform of the podcast. So sometimes people, when I teach in the Vistage groups, sometimes people say, "Hey, Mark, I'm never going to sell my business. I want to pass on to the next generation." I'm like, "Well, do you want to pass them on a headache?" You know what I mean? Like, so I believe that I used to run a volunteer men's organization, and one of the things I used to say to the men who were the leaders in it, I said, "You owe a debt to the future leaders, not to be a cautionary tale." So how do we, and then I would say to the business owners on Long Island, I would say, look, owning a small business on Long Island is like having a bad girlfriend or bad boyfriend. It treats you great in the good days. What's it treat you like in the bad days? So how do you tame the beast that is the business? This is the first and probably most important rung in the ladder.
Yeah. And it's
The
interesting
biggest bang for the buck.
with whether it's passing on to other generations and whether it's M&A coming in and buying, if you want to sell it, they're going to want to see the data. And I'll
Yeah.
argue that nowadays, that generation that's coming in, for the most part, these kids, for lack of a better word, are data driven. They grew up with these apps. They want to see. You were just talking about like you're just talking about that restaurant. I'll bet you that guy who came out of college is now looking at those restaurants now, and they're gearing their menus to data that's coming through, and they're
That's
grasping,
exactly right.
right?
That's
So
exactly right. They've even created a new menu with the same food, but they've created a new menu because he figured out that we love delicious, fattening food, but we also know that that's not necessarily great for you. So, and Cubans love rice. I mean, they throw rice in everything. It's
yeah,
unbelievable. And anything the more fattening we throw it into the dish, that's just what we do. But these friends of mine created a menu that was strictly skinny or guilt-free, let's
yep,
say, food,
Yeah.
all because of data, what
yep,
people were ordering. And it would be like, hey, I want the steak, but don't give me the potatoes and don't give me the rice, give me vegetables. And that's how they started tracking and creating this. So yeah, I agree with that 1,000%.
yeah. And it's either whether you're going to pass it on, whether you want to stay relevant in the market, because if you're not looking at your data is not clean and you're tracking on a regular basis, your competitors are. So, there's your competitors, there's the people you want to sell it to, it's the generation you want to pass it to. All of those, there's not one of those there's an excuse not to. And a lot of times, like as you said, they're going to ask, let me see your sales process. I want to see it documented. I don't want to hear you just talk about it. I want to see the sales process. Because with any of these things, there's the emotional part about it. Like this worked, this worked, this worked. Well, did it really? Did you test it? Can I see the data that it worked? It didn't work?
Yeah. So let me give some fodder to this too, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to show the diagrams at this point of what it looks like within Vistage as a whole. So I'm going to tell you guys what it looks like, and then Noah will add it to the graphics of the podcast. So my average audience in Vistage is doing $66 million in revenue. They're worth about $37 million. The company is worth about $37 million. And if we could fix everything that's wrong with it, it'd be worth $13 million more approximately.
Yeah.
So the number one thing out of the gate is $1.4 million more just sales and marketing. Now we have to talk a little bit about the difference between sales and marketing, because I don't know if you've noticed this, Chris, but marketing companies tend to suck at sales and sales companies tend to suck at marketing. So I prefer those two things separated out. But what that does, that tells me if the company could be worth on average 1.4 million more. And let's say it's a Cuban company down in Miami, just to be hypothetical, and they want to pass it on to the next generation. Well, then you don't throw tons of money at this thing. And the reason why is because a small business is illiquid. Like, I'm putting on my financial advisor hat here. If you're going to be taking your company to market within a short period of time, a year, 2 years, 3 years, well, then it actually makes sense to throw more money at it, because it's going to happen faster than it normally would. What you don't want to do is you don't want to be going into due diligence and not have done a pre-due diligence. In effect, like Chris, you do the audits of the CRM. Well, we're talking about doing a pre-due diligence audit. Am I going to pass due diligence on the first go? Just so you understand, so we're all on the same page here. My average audience, and this is now, it's statistically relevant data. We're at 2,200 case studies so far just in the last 2 years within Vistage. Of them, 63% will pass due diligence. So they score themselves on a scale of 1 to 100. Will you pass due diligence in the first go? That's a D minus. So there's plenty of room for growth here. And there's a thing that I've tripped over. There's a famous chair in New York City named Norma Rosenberg, and she's kind of like, I used to call her the Jewish Gandhi. Like, picture a little teeny like grandmother with a poof of white hair, but she would drop wisdom bombs that would hit the ground like a grenade. And the best one she ever said to me 15 years ago made me sit back and say, man, I need to shut up around this woman. She said that CEOs will throw psychological reins around the company and pull it back to the level they're comfortable at. And they don't even know they're doing it. Because here's the real God's honest truth. Whether you bring in a consultant, you join in Vistage, whatever, you're doing this to grow your business. But then they spend an inordinate amount of time trying to look good in front of each other and ignore the gorilla in the room. The beauty of the software that Core Value came up with is you can't ignore it now. So what my role is to walk them through, do the diagnostics, figure out what's wrong, and then refer them out. The catch is they don't always have a budget for it. That's why I'm thinking the CRM audit is the best place for them to start, and then springboard. So call it crawl, walk, run.
Yep.
All right. So the first thing you got to do is figure out what's wrong. Then you got to figure out why it's wrong. Then figure out how you're going to fix it, and then who's going to hold the sales force accountable. And my sense is you do all those things. Am I correct, Chris?
Yeah, exactly. And I'll add one other thing to it is that why a map. What I'll say the audit, and I like to also refer to it as a map of where the top of your sales funnel is coming from, and do you have any visibility to where that final sale is, and do you have all the tools and points along the way to be able to see that. And you see it all across, like whether we were talking about it before, you have these top salespeople that just keep it in a Excel spreadsheet, a piece of paper, whatever it is, and you don't own it. Whether it's the marketing department says they're kicking ass right now, but really, do you have a measurement to really know that they are, because the sales department is complaining, or is the sales department getting lots of stuff and not doing anything with it? And if you don't have visibility on that and be able to see it from a map, where is it broken? Well, I don't know unless I have a map that shows me, the first where I started and where it's supposed to end and where did it break along that spot.
And even then,
the audit will show you that map. Yeah, exactly. And an audit shows you that map. It's like you sit there and you like, well, you'll see right away they start pointing fingers, and the political games that go on within a company, and they're pointing fingers, as you say, across the board. But once you show them the data and you have this piece, but a lot of times they just don't have the correct processes around their tools in place to be able to see the data. And it's not that hard. They just need to have a correct, I tell them all the time, if I'm walking around in the woods and I don't have a map, I have no idea that I'm lost.
Yeah.
At least if I have a map, I know that I'm lost and I can get back on track.
I want to take this in a little bit of a different direction, but with CRM. And again, I'm bringing this back to what I do. Obviously, I'm nowhere near as smart as you guys, but in terms of communications plan.
The Dolphin fan thing.
Listen, we beat you twice, all right? And we shut you out one of them this season. So the data is what helps a professional communicator that is forward thinking, not just reactive to, oh my God, we have a crisis, plan for the future. And if anyone watches this, it's not just about me. Your communicators, if you're CEO in a Vistage group and your chief comms officer, A, doesn't exist, or B, exists but is buried somewhere in the org chart, I think you're making a huge mistake and threatening your business, because inevitably you will need them, whether they're in charge of marketing or responding to a crisis. But the CRM, which is relevant to Chris, the CRM is a tool that I feel, and I've seen it done before with folks that I've worked with in other large public relations firms, they can take the data from a CRM and look at where your sales are, and or they could say, you've had issues in this area before. This is where you could have a client crisis, or this is where you may need to spend more time focusing on your overall business plan. I look at it as a little bit of a different tool, because I don't know if it's left brain or right brain, but I'm the different side of the brain than Mark. Mark is more financial and evolutionary science, which he could talk to us about for a long time, and more on my side, which is communications. And I look at it as anything that tells the company's story can predict where it will have challenges in the near and near future and long term.
Yeah, and Mike, what makes that even in today, and I don't know where you two are on this, but I'm seeing it every day now, is people asking about AI and AI assistance and predictability and all of that. The first step along that place is, well, I'm like, is your data in order? Because there's everybody's looking at ChatGPT and they can type in these cool questions and get answers across the platform. But when you start putting AI into your organization and it's looking at specifically the data sets that you're providing it better be clean and it better be right. Because when it is, you're going to get predictions about your future you're going to get them at on your fingertips immediately. Going into that, what's working, what's not working, where are we going to be in 5 years if we continue down this path? Are there other paths we can take? Where is it broken? And it's going to be able to answer that all very quickly if the data is correct. Because, I was talking to a consultant at Deloitte the other day. He was like, the biggest thing we have going on with AI is both data security and is the data accurate. And, so you take that down to a smaller company, and that goes back to, do we have everything in place that we're capturing all of the data? Is the data being captured accurately? And do we have all those tools so that we go to what you were just saying, Mike, and like, I want to predict the future. And it's right here at our fingertips, but there's a couple of things that have to be in place.
Yeah, and with AI, the way that public relations and communicators are trying to use it right now, I don't think has reached there where you're predicting the future. What they're basically testing with it is as a personal assistant.
Yeah,
that it can do certain tasks to help you get started. A lot of the examples are, if I have writer's block today, I cannot write, and you just put information in and it gives you a first draft. But the AI for companies has to be incorporated also into comms plans, whether it's marketing or crisis or just general strategy around sales for whatever it is your business is, because it is a factor. It's a factor whether it's in your CRM. It's a factor whether you have a beautiful website and someone needs to gather information and you have an AI assistant. What do we call them? The chat, AI chats.
Chatbots.
That could be on there. So any of that is relevant to a comms plan.
Yeah, and when you look at it from a sales perspective, if what we're doing, if we can show what we're being successful at the top of the pipeline, at the marketing side as it's coming into the sales qualified leads, I can then look at operations down the. If we're capturing that data, how's that going to affect operations in a manufacturing plant in 6 months or 3 months from now? And what do I need to start planning as far as either staffing or products or whatever the case is along those lines? If we have all of that in place.
There's one other thing too, Mike, get this. Chris and I were talking about this the other day. It's really sneaky bastard stuff. It's like hiring PIs on your potential prospects.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that, and like let our audiences know about it, Chris. Like you don't have to use any brand names, but tell me what you were talking to me the other day about.
You got to refresh my memory. I'm not remembering.
There was some type of service like, okay, we could for my CRM, I have about 5,000 CEOs contacts information. I have about 3,000 CEOs cell phone numbers, stuff like that.
Oh, right.
We could actually find out like background information. On the CEOs.
It's out there in the open. But what we can, nowadays, Mark has a database of years worth of contact information. We have very little. Because he just wasn't important to capture it at the time, but we have very little company information, or what do they sell, what their sales are. He's capturing it now, but back then we have names, phone numbers. we can hook up to a number of different databases now, hook that up to it, press a button, it'll scan his whole database and populate it back with all of that company information. And that's been around for a little while, but it's the prices are coming down as the data sets are bigger and more available to people.
Well, so let me give you an example about that. There's a thing called Advisor Stream. It actually has an algorithm inside it to know, like, let's say you two are in my database. What information are you interested in? And then through AI, it generates that information and spits it out to them as a newsletter.
Yeah.
So this way, it's kind of a drip marketing campaign, Mike, where it's like it's kind of like tapping on the shoulder, giving you reminders. Because one of the things I notice is I go in, and I'm a very highly regarded speaker within Vistage, right? But I'm not number one. There's about 16 people on planet Earth that are ahead of me in a number of ways. But what happens is they're exposed to 8 world-class speakers a year. So sometimes I come back a year or two later and they don't remember me at all. So one of the reasons why I wanted to create this platform was to make sure that we could still stay point of mind with the CEOs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like maybe a newsletter makes sense, that type of thing. So if we find out more about them, I think actually we can stay in touch with them, assuming they want to. And then we just make it available for them to unsubscribe whenever they want to. So this way they can know more about these videos. Like the group I spoke to yesterday in Upland, California, they were very intrigued by the podcast. And like, well, can I give you suggestions about what videos to shoot? I'm like, yeah. And then we'll shoot the video and then just put it up there and let you know it's up there.
I also think what's important there too is that from a data standpoint is that people want to hear messages that are relevant to them. So, if you're just shooting out everything to everybody, they're like, you're going to bore half the people or more than that. If we know who wants to hear what, because of whether we know what the industry they're on, what data you capture from, then you can target that. And it sounds weird, but to a lot of people, but like, I don't want to hear messages about stuff that aren't relevant to me, but I do want to hear messages that are relevant to me.
Yeah, there's a thing I do that's a little unusual. Like when I'm watching sports or what have you, I'll pause the actual game so that I don't have to watch the advertisements I don't want to watch. But yet the advertisements I do want to watch, like let's say at the Super Bowl, they're funny. I like them. So it's like I'll watch those, but any other game I'm not watching any of them if I don't have to. So it's like how do we make it more like that and kind of steer into it? That's one of the reasons why I think YouTube is the future. I don't know about you guys, but I'm on YouTube watching the people that I like on it all the time. I think it's what happens is because I can decide when I want to watch it, I can cram it into the crevices of my day, and I can watch the stuff that I really want to watch. You know what I mean?
Well, on that point, you're spot on. What has happened in the media industry now is I'm still with the NBC Universal, so they are they have their fast channels, they have their Peacock is their
their streaming
platform. But what they're finding is that even if you're not necessarily taking in your local news on television at a normal time, you're maybe getting it from your phone or from YouTube. Local news is still important enough for them to really go and find it. Whereas I'm going to stick with NBC because I'm still with them at the moment. NBC News Now is on YouTube. That is 24 hours a day. You're just on there. You're going to see news reports.
Yeah.
And it's because it's easier. You don't need to have a television on. You can have this in the background of your computer in one of the tabs. And it is also the fact that you have the flexibility to watch it whenever you'd like to watch it. But YouTube does something else for, I'm not a reporter, but for the reporters I've worked with, it gives them a platform with, I don't want to say skipping the line, but really skipping a lot of the corporate career ladders that you have to skip or while you're a young reporter. If you have a good enough story or report, you can use the YouTube platform so effectively, especially if it's visual. I wouldn't recommend it for something that's print and you have on a screen. I'm referring to something that attracts the eye. And a YouTube story could go viral. As a young journalist or aspiring journalist, you use this platform and you can reach a lot of folks, and automatically you are an influencer. I mean, I always use the example of what my kids watch when I was growing up. I mean, I was lucky if I had a coloring book. I mean, we didn't have TV on demand or anything else. And when Mark was growing up, I mean, we still had horse and buggies. But
Yeah.
I mean, the point is they have whatever they want, and it's a click away or a finger push away, and that opens up new opportunities. Whether it's a podcast like this, inspiring journalists, someone who wants to be an influencer, the Joe Rogans of the world, which are many of them that successful, but this is a guy that just started something, and look at where it has taken off. And now it is a platform that you must visit, that you must, if you want to be respected and recognized, you have to speak to folks like Joe Rogan.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like I spend more time and use Spotify for podcasts than music. Every day I'm pulling up like which are the 10 podcasts around subjects that I want to listen to. Scroll through them. This is the subject I want to listen to, and I pop it right in and take the dog for a walk and listen to that subject. Even like there's that whole genre of being able to see it or grab what you want, whatever you want. I mean, what are the classes that you have out there now?
Yeah. Oh, the great courses. And
Yeah,
stuff like that.
courses. Like there's so many platforms out there. I want to learn this, and I want it at my time. It's phenomenal. I always tell this thing. My son, who's older now, but when he was in junior high and high school, he taught himself 5 programming languages. Never once took a programming class, and he was basically fluent in them. And because he had such an intense interest, there was nothing to stop him from just going on YouTube, going on to different courses, whatever it was that he was going into, pulling up specific things that he was interested on his time and learning what he wanted to learn.
Yeah. There's also, there's a thing about the back end of my presentation, just to pull this back to the CRM.
Yeah.
What happens is that my presentation is referred to as dense. So it's because kind of I don't know where to cut. I want to give them as much information as I possibly can. So what I see the YouTube connecting to the CRM is that they're like, well, what next? Well, what are you interested in? I touched on so many topics here. What we're doing is building, in effect, an epistemology of knowledge for the CEOs. That's what this channel is really all about. But how do I get that out there when, on YouTube, 13-year-old boys are not going to be watching our podcasts, at least not for the business stuff. So, and that's the key demographic on YouTube. So we have to push it out there with the CRM. It's how do you get the message out? You have to know what the message that the person wants.
Yep.
So, and we have to kind of figure that out. So Chris and I are doing that right now for the podcast to see if we can drive subscribership. You got to have the CRM in order to do it. And frankly, we cut to it like 2 years ago when I first brought Chris in to see my data when I first started utilizing it. And he kept telling me, oh, you got to do this, and this. And I was like, oh man, I can't believe I got to do all this stuff. Like I was whining like a bitch, right? So the deal was like, I was just whiny about it. But now slowly but surely we're peeling that onion and moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
I know where your dense presentation, I think you could cut the opening jokes. I think if you cut that, maybe it'll be a little bit easier. No, it's an excellent presentation from what I've seen. But I agree with the use of CRM. I just, like I said, I view it a different way because I've never really been in charge of sales. I mean, I sell myself, I sell my business, etc. But I've never been in charge of sales in-house. But you can use, or you should actually use that information to drive your communications, some call it PR, your PR strategy, and not just for planning for a crisis, but as a matter of fact, planning for the company's future.
Yeah. And I'll even argue, Mike, that, like there's a certain extent of that you must have a list somewhere. I mean, Mark talks about it all the time. He's like, I got all these people on my cell phone. We can just do it from my cell phone. Like, well, yeah, but so that's to a certain extent that's his CRM. I mean, like that's his Rolodex, and they go everything from that to being absolutely sophisticated, linking to all sorts of other different applications. But everybody uses it to a certain extent. And once you realize that, and then you sit there and go, okay, this is all the data I have that's personal to me, that actually drives my livelihood. For you, I'm sure there's people relationships that you have that drive your livelihood. And there's probably relationships that you're just starting to have or developing that if you had those and you might be able to hold it all in your head, but as people grow into these things, being able to drop them into buckets and be able to see them, like Mark said, he's been dropping all these things in there, and then one day he's like, well, I want to see everybody who's in the construction business. Well, I gave him everybody who he has in there in the construction business. It's probably not everybody in his data, so we don't know that because we don't have all that data, but we do have some of it as we've been building it out. But those questions then, and the other side of all of that is that everybody's, we're talking about the media and so forth. There's along with all those media places to go get things is personal brands, and what becomes valuable then is around that personal brand is your data. Because who you have relationships with and who you want to have relationships with is going to drive that what the value of that brand later on.
I think even there's I think to say that it's really an asset.
Yes, 100%.
Based on the accuracy of it, because there's an innovation speaker within Vistage who's really quite good, and she said to me, she goes, "Look, I don't need this, I don't need that. I've got a 20,000 CEO database." And I was like, damn, that's one of the reasons why I started to do mine.
Yep.
Because I wasn't sure like what I could use it for or what have you. But when she ultimately retires, I'm going to offer to buy it from her. You know what I mean? Like, why not? She said, like, I'm on her newsletter. I don't know that I do the newsletter the way she does it, but the deal is that I'm on it. So whenever she looks to kind of hang up her cleats, I'm going to make an offer for that database.
Makes sense.
It's just like a kind of looking at it as it's part and parcel.
Yep.
But it all comes back to this from the big picture. If I could sum this up, business owners treat their businesses like a business, and what they have to start thinking like is an investor, because investors pay the most for businesses, but they don't buy businesses. They buy investments. They're not looking to work 80 hours a week and keep stuff in their head. They want it to run on its own. What's the reassurance that you have for them to make sure that your company runs on its own? The CRM is probably stage 1, 2, 3, and 4 in that category.
Yeah.
So then it gets down to like, what's the sales process, what have you? Because otherwise you're not going to pass due diligence because you're not looking at it as an investment. You're not looking at it as an asset. So, and I think that's stage 1 of the process. So I really appreciate you coming on with us, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great fun, guys.
So let's do this again soon, okay?
Yeah, peace out.